You're listening to Brave Girls with Tracy M., where we choose to empower you to be a better leader, mentor, and coach in the world. We'll share stories of people who have achieved great heights by overcoming adversity and rising to the challenge, all while pursuing their passions. These courageous people will inspire you to have faith in yourself and take bold action. Right here with the host of Brave Girls, Tracy M.
On today's show, I interview clinical psychologist Dr. Diane Pomerantz, the author of Lost in the Reflecting Pool. A mutual connection brought us together for this recording, and I know you will take a few items away from our conversation about her Brave Girl journey. Her memoir chronicles her personal story of her marriage falling apart and how she coped with the situation as she was simultaneously fighting a very aggressive form of breast cancer. She shares how writing and journaling allowed her to express her emotions of rage, anger, and grief. We talk about her experiences with infertility, miscarriages, adoption, and more as a mother. She encourages others to trust what they see and sense in their gut. As she learned to pay attention to her intuition, she found how important it is to share this lesson with other women. She was fortunate to have a support system outside of her marriage that enabled her to manage her way through all of these trials. We talk about narcissism and how it manifests in healthy and unhealthy ways, and how to cope with these behaviors when someone appears in your circle with these tendencies. I hope you find this episode of Brave Girls with Tracy M. helpful on your journey as a brave girl. Now let's go. So welcome to Brave Girls with Tracy M. Tonight we have Dr. Diane Pomerantz with us, and she's the author of Lost in the Reflecting Pool. She is a clinical psychologist in the Baltimore area, and she's been practicing for quite a few years. And her memoir, Lost in the Reflecting Pool, is available on Amazon, and it's really her story of her life. And so welcome to the show.
Hi, how are you?
Good. So I just wanted to let our readers know that Lost in the Reflecting Pool is a story that you wrote. And it's published, and it's your memoir. So tell us a little bit about your story and why you felt called to write a memoir.
Well, I started the book, it really was a process, and I started it back in 1998 when I was diagnosed with an aggressive form of breast cancer. And when I first started writing it, I started writing it really as, I was going to write it as a story about my journey through breast cancer treatment. And it was a very aggressive form of breast cancer. But as it turned out, my marriage really began to fall apart at that same time, which for me was far worse than the cancer itself. In fact, it was the cancer itself for me.
Right.
And I had 2 young children. So I did a lot of journaling at that time, but that was the beginning of when I started writing it. So the writing initially was cathartic.
Right, therapeutic.
And I wrote it as a way to, it was cathartic, it was rageful, it was just a way to express everything that was going on. I continued to be married through a year of treatment for cancer and another year, and then I separated. And then I was parenting 2 young children by myself, so I really didn't write much for the next X number of years, a long time.
Right.
You know, I would go over those first 7 chapters and rewrite those same 7 chapters over and over again, but didn't really move until about 2013. My kids were about to graduate college or had just graduated college. And then I picked it up and started writing. But by then I had also moved through a lot of the issues and processed a lot. And it was a very different experience.
Right, right. And so for our listeners who aren't familiar with your book, you were married to a psychiatrist who was very charming, very smart, but there was also darkness. And like you said, you had gone through the adoption process, infertility treatments. You had gone through quite a bit in your marriage to get to the point of having that family that you guys wanted. But then as you were diagnosed with your cancer, then things started to shift a little bit, it sounds like.
Yes, and I think this is really a premise of the book. There, even from the very beginning, there were little things that I saw. And one of the premises that I think is very important in my book is, I think this is true for women in general, more so, I don't know, it's probably true for everybody, but I think it certainly is for women. We don't trust what we see. So it's not that we don't see it, because I think we do see it. And I know I saw things from the very beginning, but I tended to ignore them and didn't pay attention or didn't trust my gut feelings about the significance of things that were very important. For example, very shortly after we had gotten married, and my husband had been very charming. I mean, for years, he brought me flowers all the time. But one morning or one day I was in a bad mood. And I don't know, he said something to me, and I remember clearly, and this is in the book, standing in the doorway when he said it and thinking to myself, if I am ever really sick, he won't be able to be there for me. This was 15, 16 years before I was diagnosed with cancer. But I had that thought.
And that feeling and your intuition. Wow.
I didn't pay attention to it, but I can see it now where I was standing and how I felt at that moment.
And you just knew.
And I knew. And I knew it. And I just knew it. So right. I think, and that's something throughout the book that is a theme. And it's something I think a message, one of the messages I really want people to pay attention to, that those gut feelings, they're like an inner watchdog that we all have to pay attention to. We may not be able to articulate it exactly in words, but there's something that we know and we need to pay attention to.
Right, because you feel it in your body. And like you say, you may not have the words to describe it, but there's definitely, and as women, we are wired to have so much intuition.
Right.
It's just how we're built.
Right. So that's a very important It's very important. And I think that is a theme throughout my life, not only within my marriage, but certainly within my life. And so I think if there's anything that has changed for me through my whole experience of my marriage and what I went through in the marriage, I pay much more attention to those gut feelings now.
Yeah, that was probably a major life lesson that you were supposed to learn. As much as it was hard to go through all that, but what you said that really stuck with me is trust what you see.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a major message to all women.
Yes, absolutely.
So at what point did you realize that your husband was maybe controlling or all about himself, or at what point, did you kind of, or was it over time you came to realize that he was a narcissist?
Well, I realized he was controlling over the course of time. But for many years, things were okay. There were good things. And I wrote it off to nobody's perfect.
Right.
But there were a lot of subtleties things that I didn't pay attention to. How he isolated me from people.
Mm-hmm.
Which is something narcissists tend to do. There's the prologue of my book is a very intense scene where there's, people have said to me that it's a Hitchcock scene.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you want me to tell you what happens?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so
I'm still going to read your book, but yes, please tell me.
Okay, so what happens is my daughter was 5, my son was 2.5, and we had moved into a new house. And the cat who was the owner's cat, who had lived there before, the previous owner's cat, would come back to the house, scratch on the windows. I would let the cat in, and we would call the owners. And my kids loved the cat when the cat would come over, and it was a whole thing. And it would annoy my ex-husband terribly. He wound up taking the cat and shooting it. So that's the scene I tell about. I don't explicitly say that's what happened to the cat, but that's the prologue. But in reality, and that was about 6 years before I got sick. Maybe 8 years before I got sick. I really forgot about it. I repressed it entirely because it was so terrifying to me, so horrendous to me. It really spoke. You ask, what was the moment? I actually didn't realize this until after my book was published. But the thing that happened was, because I was so upset about it, but repressed it, I think in many ways I just totally withdrew. And then he became, the things that he did, that controlling, intensified, and I would go into rages because I really started noticing it, because he wasn't getting his narcissistic needs met, but I was really I just had withdrawn. And that went on. Things started at that point to really, after that incident. But I was unaware because I didn't remember the incident. When I got sick, he became, the year before I got sick, and then the year I got sick, he became downright sadistic. And the gaslighting and the sadism were really unbelievable. I mean, it was very, very bad.
Mm-hmm.
And that was when I remembered the incident. And when I wrote the memoir, I actually had that scene further towards the end of the book, and somebody who was reading the manuscript said, "Why don't you start with that, because it's so powerful?" So I did, not realizing that really was the beginning, the real beginning of the end of the relationship.
And as a mother, as you were going through this, I'm imagining, especially as you got the cancer diagnosis, your thoughts are about making sure not only are you taken care of, but your children.
Well, yes, absolutely. I mean, my kids were little.
Right. And had he isolated you to the point where you didn't really have a strong support system, or you still kind of did?
I actually, that was something I didn't give up, and it was the thing that saved me.
Yes, because I think sometimes women who may find themselves in that situation would have given that up. But that was smart on your part. That was very smart.
Yes. I gave up a lot of my professional, collegial relationships, but I had made very strong mother friendships. And that was what saved me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the support, despite the fact that he wasn't there at all for me during my cancer, my support system was very strong. So I had a very strong support system.
That's good. Because that would have been horrible.
Absolutely. It would have been. My father was still alive at the time. So my father and I had a very strong friendships.
Right.
Which made him very angry.
Of course.
Because he was jealous, which is another characteristic of the narcissist, is that sort of competitiveness and jealousy.
Right. Yeah, so I'm sure some of our listeners have been in either relationships with a parent, a coworker, a boss that is a narcissist, and they may not know what those characteristics are. And so talk a little bit about that.
Well, narcissism is many things. It's not just a unitary thing. So narcissism itself it's, self-regard. There's healthy narcissism, being able to have positive self-regard. And that's good. But when you talk about malignant narcissism, what we're talking about is grandiosity, controlling behavior, someone who isolates you, is competitive with you, doesn't puts you down, doesn't want you to have any gratification, plays word games with you. I used to, you're always feeling as if you don't know if you're, if it's you who's crazy or they're crazy. I mean, I used to always feel like what he did and said was crazy making. And he was a master manipulator with words. I mean, he could twist words in such a way that there was no way I could keep up with. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty good verbally. He could turn it around. And in the end, I didn't know which end was up. In the end, I would think of it as verbal masturbation. But the thing that you have to know is they have no boundaries. And you have to have very strong boundaries. You have to be able to say no. And so it's very hard because they know they're very intuitive about what your weak spots are. Right. And they know exactly how to get you. I mean, my ex would pay no, in the end, when we were still in the same house, but not really together, he would act as if I wasn't there. But if he wanted something from me, he would be talking to me as if we were us. Otherwise, I didn't exist. But when he wanted, somebody had a dog he wanted me to adopt. So he talked about, do we want to get a poodle? Do we want a poodle? I was about to separate and move out. Do we want a poodle? No, I don't want a poodle.
Wow.
But, but by that time I knew what he was doing.
Right.
But it was that, it's a very simple thing. But before, I would have thought it meant something other than being a conscious and deliberate manipulation.
Right.
And it is conscious and deliberate. There's really, he used to be very slow to respond. I'd say something, and sometimes it would take him a long time to respond. And I didn't know what that was. It used to drive me crazy. I realized it was that he was always thinking of the best way to respond because he had to say it the right way.
Right.
And I think that really is what a lot of narcissists do. There are different kinds, though. There are the more impulsive types of narcissists, but then there are the more cerebral or narcissists that are more low-key, that don't really look like they're so grandiose, but they can be just as dangerous.
Right. So I guess is it a spectrum?
Absolutely.
It's a spectrum.
And some are more dangerous than others. But there are those that have a lot more sociopathic tendencies than others.
So talk about that, because I'm not a psychologist. I tend to think of that as like a close cousin. So talk a little bit about that.
And a malignant narcissist, see, they don't have a sense of, a narcissist doesn't have a true sense of self. Mm-hmm. And they don't have empathy for others. So it's very easy for them to be very moralistic about what somebody else is doing. But since they have no idea about themselves and they can't see themselves, there's no way that they can judge their own actions.
Because there's not that self-awareness.
There's no self-awareness.
Right.
So my ex used to say I remember once he said to me in the end of our relationship, I only told you one lie in our whole relationship. He said, you have a very creative way of framing things. He was having an affair with a patient. He was doing all kinds of things. And he told me one lie.
Yeah, well, and when you point things out to a narcissist, don't they have a hard time with hearing that?
Absolutely. They take no responsibility. I don't think my ex ever said he was sorry. It is never their fault.
Right.
They take no responsibility. It is always the other person's fault. It is not that they never have anxiety, but their anxiety is very primitive. So it's when they really feel that they are in the depths of despair because they really feel that their supplies are completely lost. That's when it's more a state of panic. They go into a panic state and they can become really paranoid.
Right. It's
more paranoid thinking and paranoid anxiety than conflictual anxiety because they did something that is causing them conflict and they feel they did something wrong. It's a very primitive kind of panicky state at a physiological level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So now that you've written this book, I know one of the other things that I read in your bio is that you have these healing through writing workshops.
Yes, I've not done. I have done them. I haven't done one in the last 6 months. I'm probably going to be starting up another one in the fall. I have always worked a lot with trauma patients mm-hmm. and women who've gone through relationship difficulties. And I find using writing to work through trauma is a very, very helpful thing. So I do that both in groups and with individuals within my individual practice as well. The practice of using writing to deal with traumatic events, the act of writing, I think, is a way to put enough distance between oneself and the experience that it allows oneself to process it at whatever level you're ready to process it. Some people think that, oh, it could be too overwhelming. It's not too overwhelming because you're going to only be able to process it at the level you're able to process it at. And I have found that people really find that having that distance and share within the context of a group experience, hearing other people's stories normalizes the experience and makes it far less traumatic.
Right, right. And it's not like you have to publish what you write.
Absolutely.
So it's the act of hand to paper coming out of your body.
Yes.
Getting through the memory, the muscle memory, and the
yes.
All of that. And like you said, you're processing things.
And the memory, and memories are not static. Memories are fluid, and as you process it, things change. So, for example, as I wrote my book, when I first wrote it, initially I made my son twins because I was disguising him. Well, the truth is that my son, I had many, many miscarriages before I had my son. My daughter is adopted. This is all in the book. My daughter's adopted. My son was the result of IVF. And my son started out as quads. And he was the only survivor of that quadruple pregnancy. But when I decided to make it into a memoir from a novel, I had to get rid of my twins. I loved my twins. I really loved my twins. I didn't want to get rid of my twins, but they told me the publisher said I couldn't write it as a memoir if I had twins. I thought I should be able to, but I was told I had to get rid of my twins. And let me tell you, it was very hard. It really was hard because I loved my twins. And it was very funny because one night I was at dinner with my son and my daughter, they're grown, and I said, I have to tell you, I'm making it a memoir and you're not a twin anymore. And he said to me, you killed my brother? Anyway, so I thought I was doing this because I had made him a twin as a disguise. But what I realized later, months later, was the reason it was so hard to give up my twins was because I always wanted a big family. And I had all these miscarriages, and he was quadruplets. I didn't want to give up my twins. That was my last shot at having all these kids.
That's awesome.
And that was it. It wasn't so much being a disguise.
Right.
So that writing it, so what I'm getting back to is writing it and then going through that process changed the memory and made a difference. Had I not written it, and it would have been different.
Right. So do you feel like after you've written this that you've healed and like you said, it was cathartic. So I know you've seen this in your groups and your individuals that you've done trauma work with, but you've even experienced it.
I have to say, and this is, as a psychologist, I've had years of psychotherapy myself. I feel more grounded since I have published this book than I have ever felt in my life. And I think I've always been a pretty stable person. Although after this whole experience, I was pretty traumatized. It was probably the worst experience of my life. But I feel more stable, and I have had periods of depression in my life, but I've always functioned despite whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel more stable. I no longer have the depression I used to have.
Well, you've released a lot of this.
It has done more than just healing from this. I think I just feel more grounded.
That's fantastic.
In my life in general.
That's fantastic.
I think it's from writing this.
Well, and you're actually, and I don't know if this was your intention in the beginning, but through your work and through your book, you're educating other women through your story. And so, I think that by publishing, your book, it's going to help people, and it's going to help other women to see through your story, are they with a narcissist? Are they in relationship, or now that you've gone over and you've explained what the characteristics are, the signs, so maybe they can make a different choice, and maybe they're ignoring their intuition, and they're not trusting what they see. So, what a wonderful gift and legacy that you're leaving for others.
I feel like that was what the purpose of writing the book was. I felt like I was giving, besides for myself, I felt like I had a story that was important to share.
Right. So my finale question is always, what's the bravest thing you've ever done, and how does it inspire you today?
So I never really think about that I've been so brave. The hardest thing, when I had cancer, at that time, they were doing stem cell transplants for breast cancer. And my kids were young. My son was 6, my daughter was 9. And my husband did not want me to have the stem cell transplant, although all my doctors recommended it. And he didn't want me to because I'd be out of work. And I couldn't make up my mind whether I was going to do it or not. And I had to make the decision by my 4th chemotherapy cycle, because then I had to do that, and then I would have 4 more chemotherapy cycles. And I couldn't make up my mind. And it was a gut-wrenching decision. And I had the flu, and I was in the hospital, and I sobbed the entire time I was there, spoke to people who had done it, and I spoke to experts, spoke to everybody I knew. And I knew he didn't want me to do it. but I didn't really realize, well, then I got out of the hospital and on a Sunday, and I went to this healing workshop for women on Monday, which I had asked him to go with me to, but he didn't. And there was a woman there, and she started talking, and she said her daughter, who was, I think, in her mid-30s and had 3 kids under 5, was going to die. She had breast cancer, and it was all over her body, and she was going to die. And I couldn't stop crying as she talked. I was like sobbing along with her. I was hysterical. And so when I walked out of there and I had to go pick up my kids from school, I was walking into the school, all of a sudden it just came to me, I'm going to do the stem cell transplant. That even if it doesn't make a difference, my kids deserve to have their mother alive. Mm-hmm. I'm going to do it. And I called my husband to tell him I'd made the decision. Mm-hmm. And he was silent. He didn't say anything. And it was clear to me that he was not happy. And at some level, I knew that that really was the end of the marriage. Because even though I knew it, I guess there was still part of me that didn't really want it to be.
Right.
But
that was a brave decision, though.
So I guess that was.
Very brave. Very brave.
So.
Well, and here you are. So.
Yeah, they didn't expect me, even with the stem cell, transplant. Mm-hmm. They didn't expect me to make it. I had a very aggressive cancer with lymph node involvement.
Right. So. Well, I'm glad you're still here with us.
Me too.
I'm glad you're still here with us. And thank you so much for being on the podcast. Your story is inspiring. The work that you're doing out in the world is inspiring. The world needs more people like you that are trained psychologists that can work with trauma people who've been traumatized. I think, a lot of people have experienced trauma. And so learning how to work through it with a professional is really so important. So thank you so much. We will be sure to put all of your information in the show notes so folks can buy your book and they can learn more about you. And again, thank you so much for sharing your story tonight.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of Brave Girls with Tracy M. as much as I did creating it. Each show is produced with you, the listener, in mind, as you look for inspiration and motivation from other brave souls as you pursue your desires. I'd love to hear your feedback, so please leave me a review on iTunes. I read every one. And check out my website, tracym.com, for more free resources. You can also join my list and sign up for my newsletter right from the homepage. Until next time, stay strong, believe in your dreams, and go do something brave.
We appreciate you joining us for this episode of Brave Girls with Tracy M. and hope that you enjoyed the show. For more information about today's episode, as well as additional free resources to help you achieve greatness in your life, visit tracym.com and sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, dream big, believe in yourself, and let your brilliance shine as only you can do.